What I'd like to do in this video is to show you how layers work in Aleph Null. You can think of the basic architecture of Aleph Null like this. Think of layers of canvases stacked on top of one another. And think of multiple brushes painting on those canvases. At any particular time, a brush is painting on just one canvas, and you can have multiple brushes painting on one canvas or on multiple canvases. So that's the basic picture. Each of the animations in Aleph Null can be thought of as, if there are multiple brushes, then you can have multiple layers of canvases. Actually, at the implementation level, it is implemented as multiple HTML canvases stacked on top of one another. What we're looking at now, which is the Bill Bissett brush, this is a big one, right? It lays down these big circles. And so by default, when you create one of these brushes, it's put in the background. Basically, when you create a brush, it's either put in the background or it's put in the foreground. Now you can change these, as we'll see in this video. You can elevate a brush, or you can put it down further. You have granular control over that, as we'll see. But when you create a brush, it's either by default going to go into the background or it's going to go into the foreground. And which one of those it's going to be depends on how big that is. I mean, if it's big, then you're probably going to want it in the background. And if it's quite a delicate brush that doesn't lay down too much area per brush stroke, then you're going to want it in the foreground, because if it was in the background, then it's going to get obscured by this sort of brush. But anyway, let's have a look at this in action. Well, first of all, right here we have the fader. And although most of these sliders apply to only the currently editable brush, which is currently the Bissett Dirty Concrete brush, we've only got one brush going on right now. The fader slider applies to a layer, applies to all the brushes in the layer. So if you've got more than one brush and they're all in the same layer, then the fader slider is going to have the same value for all of the brushes in that layer. They're all going to be faded by the same amount. Currently the fader is set to 0, which means no fading. And also note that in the fader slider, we see what layer the currently editable brush is in, layer 1. Layer 1 is the topmost layer. All right, let's create a random brush. So we create like so. What have we got? Here's this new brush. We can see it. What's going on? Well, we see that this brush is now in the foreground layer, and this other brush, the Bissett brush, is in the background. We can see that that's true because this subtle brush is not getting overwritten by the other brush. So we can tell that the subtle brush is in the foreground and the Bissett brush is in the background. So currently the editable brush is the one that we just created, the Stasha Veluti brush. And we see that it's in layer 1. Now let's go to the Bissett Dirty Concrete brush, and we see that it's in layer 2. So this is how you can tell for sure what layer a particular brush is on. You make it the editable brush, and then you have a look-see at what the value of the layer is here. So the lower the number, the higher up it is. Layer 1 is higher than layer 2. Okay, well, let's see if we can put these two brushes in the same layer. And what's going to happen, of course, if we put them in the same layer is that the Bill Bissett brush is going to obscure the Stasha Veluti brush, because the Stasha Veluti brush is more subtle. It doesn't lay down very much area per brush stroke, whereas these are big Bill Bissett circles. So these two buttons here, up and down, control the elevation of the currently editable brush, which is the Bissett Dirty Concrete brush. So Bissett is in layer 2. Let's move that up. I click once. Now what do we got? Yeah, so you see that every time it lays down a circle now, it obscures the stash of veluti brush. Yeah, so they're in the same layer now. Okay, well, let's create another random brush. Oh, we've got two Bissett Dirty Concrete brushes, so actually I'm going to make it different. I'm going to say make it Juka-Peka Curvenin brush. So you can see it's this one that's rotating. You've got two lines now. The Juka-Peka Curvenin one is rotating, and the Stasha Veluti one is doing less rotation. It's a tangent. Okay. So what do we have in terms of layers? Well, the Juka-Peka Curvenin one is on layer 1. It's in the foreground. The Stasha Veluti one is in layer 1. It's in the foreground. So the two straight line brushes are on the same layer, topmost layer. And the Bill Bissett brush should still be on layer 1, which is where we left it. Okay, so the Bill Bissett brush is indeed overwriting the other brushes when it draws. So it wouldn't be hard to make the Bill Bissett brush totally dominate if we increase the frame rate of the Bill Bissett brush. So the Bill Bissett brush is really dominating now. That's not what we want. Let's put the Bill Bissett brush in the background. We have it as the editable brush. Let's put it down now. Oh, we can't see the Bill Bissett brush working at all right now. Now, why is that? Well, that's because it filled up the layer 1. It's working furiously on layer 2, but we can't see layer 2 at all right now. Layer 1 is totally opaque. So I'm going to erase the screen, and then we will be able to see the Bill Bissett brush at work on layer 2. Sure enough, there it is. And the other two brushes, the Stasha Veluti and Juka-Peka Curvenin brushes, are not being overwritten by the Bill Bissett brush. And actually, if we go back to layer 1, we see that the fader is set at 17. So what that means is that layer 1 is being faded rather a lot, so that the background will remain visible because layer 1 is being faded. But if we were to get rid of the fade in layer 1, then what will happen is the Stasha Veluti and the Juka-Peka Curvenin brush will eventually fill layer 1. And we won't be able to see the Bill Bissett brush at all. So you see that the fader can be quite useful in making it so that you can still see stuff that's going on at lower layers. So yeah, the Bill Bissett brush is getting harder and harder to see anything at all of, as we can see. So let me increase the fader, and we will see then that what happens is that the Bill Bissett brush will start to get a little bit more visible because the fader will be operating on layer 1. Now we've got the fader set at 15, and sure enough, we can see that the Bill Bissett brush is coming back into view a little bit more. So that's basically how layers work, the basic architecture. You can picture as multiple canvases stacked one on top of one another with multiple brushes painting away furiously on those canvases.